Hey all, hope y'all are well. This is Christina Rigo with my English 5800 theory project presentation. I decided to do a 10-minute visual presentation. I thought it'd be nice to watch something since we were all constricted to our homes. So I chose the topic critical race theory as I thought it sounded like it would be relevant to my work in education and my TESOL major. Americanization, race, and the Louisiana Creole has been what my work has been on so far. So, from our theory project handout, I chose four texts to analyze, the main one being Toward a Critical Race Theory of Education by Gloria, Ladson-Billings, and William F. Tate IV. So for this work by Billings and Tate, um, it's sort of a breakdown from about the origins of critical race theory. And to quote them, critical race legal scholarship developed in the 1970s, in part because minority scholars thought they were being overlooked in critical legal studies, a better known movement that examines the way law encodes cultural norms. And what developed in legal discourse inspired critical race theory. As Billings and Tate the four discuss in their work, they highlight some of Richard Delgado's points, who is also a critical race theorist, showing similarities between critical race theory and critical race legal scholarship. So some of the similarities between critical race theory and critical race legal scholarship would be racism is endemic in American life. It's ingrained into our entire framework of a society, and the laws to remedy racial injustice are often undermined before they can fulfill their promise. Um, Traditional claims of neutrality and colorblindness are typically camouflaged for the self-interest of dominant groups, and the use of stories or first-person accounts um, are usually undermined in uh, in those dominant groups. In Chapter 7 of Critical Race Theory, 3rd edition, by Richard Delgado and Gene Stefancic, entitled Critical Race Theory Today, they talk about a noticeable divide within critical race theory discourse. They say a great divide separates two broad types of current critical race scholarship. One, the materialist or real world school, writes about issues such as globalization, immigration, nativism, the wealth divide, race and class, and the criminal justice system. And then discourse analysis, by contrast, focuses on ideas and categories by which our society constructs and understands race and racism. Writers in this camp are apt to emphasize issues such as identity and intersectionality that center on categorical thinking. They are likely to examine the roles of ideas, thoughts, feelings, unconscious discrimination, stereotype, threat, and implicit associations and their implications for judicial reasoning. And in Toward a Critical Race Theory of Education, um, Billings and Tate say this article asserts that despite the salience of race in U.S. society as a topic of scholarly inquiry, it remains untheorized. So their angle towards critical race theory is it exists and it came about from legal discourse, specifically property, uh, I'm sorry, the lack of benefit that uh, race issues have gotten from things like civil rights discourse, because it can be muddled in a lot of other rhetoric and watered down. It doesn't really get to the specifics of race issues, and so critical race theory is something that could be used in as a more direct focus. And they were just basically saying in their writing that given the America's history with property rights, race is heavily ingrained into the cultural framework, and it inherently affects our education system and everything. So it needs to be something that is discussed in great length from a theoretical perspective in academics. Billings and Tate give us the history of race relevant to property laws on page 48 of the Towards a Critical Race Theory of Education. They say we situate our discussion in an explication of critical race theory and attempt to move beyond the boundaries of the educational research literature to include arguments and new perspectives from law and the social sciences. In doing so, we acknowledge and are indebted to a number of scholars whose work crosses disciplinary boundaries. So critical race theory is very conducive to intersectionality between race and other discourses, which is useful in a time where all discourses are discovering that we're not a lonely island out here. We can extend hands with other discourse and make more relevant discussion. Work points out inherent flaws of the multicultural paradigm as an obvious solution to critical race theory's fundamental arguments. Billings and Tate say thus, as critical race theory scholars, we unabashedly reject a paradigm that attempts to be everything to everyone and consequently becomes nothing for anyone, allowing the status quo to prevail. Clearly, in this case, multiculturalism in education easily misses the mark instead of finding adequate solutions for issues dealing with race. They go on to say current practical demonstrations of multicultural education in school often reduce it to trivial examples of artifacts or cultures, such as eating ethnic food or cultural foods, singing songs or dancing, reading folk tales, and other less than scholarly pursuits of the fundamentally different concepts of knowledge or quest for social justice. Critical race theory is supported by personal accounts of racism and systemic inequalities of their professional theorists. The first reason for naming one's own reality is to demonstrate how political and moral analysis is conducted in legal scholarship. Many mainstream legal scholars embrace universalism over particularity. Critical race theorists argue that political and moral analysis is situational. These stories serve as interpretive structures by which we impose order or experience in on us and it on us. A second reason for the naming one's own reality theme of critical race theory is the psychic preservation of marginalized groups. A factor contributing to the demoralization of marginalized groups is self-condemnation. In Billings' other work, Racialized Discourses, she stands on critical race theory to illustrate inherent bias in academic communities, where underserved minority scholars and their personal experience dealing with race issues are usually undermined and disregarded as less than authoritative voices, which are clumped into folk and cultural studies categories. I was going to read the quotes, but I'm running out of time, so I have them there in the slide. And here you see Billings quoting Delgado again. To reiterate here what I covered so far, critical race theory was developed in the 1970s. Uh, It's currently divided between materialist or real world view and discourse analysis view, and it's been used to analyze various intersecting discourse fields, including but not limited to education disparities, immigration, academic disparities, property, and the flaws in multiculturalism. And it also utilizes storytelling and personal narrative to highlight real world issues of race. I'm sorry about those typos. A specific discourse example of critical race theory playing out in terms of this issue of undermining legitimate scholarship because a minority scholar or a person speaking about minority scholarship is using personal experience and then gets undermined would be Greenhill and Marshall's Racism and Denial of Racism. And I have some quotes here. I'm not going to read them because it's going to make my presentation much longer than it needs. I'm actually really pleased to have stumbled upon critical race theory because it really ties together the varying intersectionalities that I've been working with. And it's nice to see that there is a theoretical discourse which validates marginalized personal experience and sees the relevance in it as far as analytic data and uh, indigenous experience, which typically gets brushed under the carpet or just kind of ignored or deemed anecdotal. So, yes, I hope I was able to convey some of what I learned about critical race theory to you guys, and just feel free to get in touch with me if you want to source any of the information that I stumbled across. Okay, everyone, I hope y'all have a good one. Thanks.